Well, it's back. A show that lasted 13 seasons in its original run features an all-star cast of voice actors and some of Mike Judge's best work. King of the Hill. And although many aspects of this reboot are quite a bit different, it's still got a lot of the heart and many of the laughs that made us fall in love with it the first time around. But this new season sizzles more like a steak seared over charcoal than one cooked on the clean-burning flames of propane. If you're anything like me, you're tired of all the reboots, remakes, and revivals thanks to what feels like Hollywood's current lack of talent and creativity. And as far as this one goes, it might not be fall off your couch hilarious, but if you're a King of the Hill fan, it's at least worth a watch if for nothing else than just to see these characters again. And doesn't completely seem like a hollowed out version of what it once was or make you wish that it had never been made. But it is filled with many missed opportunities for laughs and some questionable writing decisions, which isn't a surprise since only one of the original writers returned for this new season, and he only contributed to 2 of the 10 episodes, unsurprisingly 2 of the better ones. This new season certainly isn't as funny as the earlier ones of the show, cause almost nothing could compare to those, but the tone is fairly on point and it's good for a few laughs or chuckles here and there. When King of the Hill was first created, what set it apart was the laughs that didn't come from how outrageous it was or how far it pushed the envelope, but rather from the exact opposite, keeping things so far from any type of inappropriate line that ironically, that's what often made it so funny. At its core, it was a show about a boring boomer with extraordinarily conservative values, and Mike Judge somehow made that hilarious, which isn't easy to do and is a testament to his comedic genius. For the most part, he stuck to that in this new season, with exceptions like, spoiler alert, when Hank and Bobby catch a girl pulling an Amber Heard on someone's desk, which came completely out of nowhere and was something you'd expect to see on Beavis and Butthead or South Park more so than King of the Hill. Inserting cheap gags like that, rather than relying on the humor which naturally comes from the quirks of each character and how those personality traits clash during their interactions, is one of the reasons this revival and the later seasons of the show never quite hit the highs of the earlier ones. Clever writing and character-driven jokes that subvert your expectations in subtle, clever ways is part of what made the show so iconic and different from other cartoons of its time. Not silly gags meant to just shock the audience. Take a scene from season 1 for example, when Nancy asks Dale,
honey, you want a beer?
While John Redcorn's also standing there, and Redcorn accidentally answers yes at the same time as Dale.
Yes.
An obvious clue to the affair he's having with Nancy. Dale then pauses for a moment, says,
How did he know I wanted a beer?
The line itself is simple, but it perfectly highlights Dale's extreme obliviousness, making it hilarious. And the show would often highlight other characters' traits in equally funny ways, like Bill's stupidity and perpetual loserdom, Bobby's bumbling innocence, Peggy's boastful lack of self-awareness, or Boomhauer's near unintelligible speech. Not to mention the many eccentricities of short-lived side characters. And some of that humor is present in the new season, like when Hank and Peggy are discussing 5-star Uber ratings, and Peggy proudly claims, "People have always said I was a 5, but for the most part, those kinds of jokes are few and far between, even though the opportunities to fit them in are clearly there. So again, it feels like these new writers don't understand how to write for this style of show. For instance, there's a scene where Bill pretends to be reading 1984 to impress Peggy. Why they chose to give him that specific book, I don't know, but it seems like it's leading to some kind of joke. Then when she suspiciously asks him what happens in it, knowing he's just pretending, instead of guessing it's about Van Halen or mentioning something else unique to that era in a sort of questioning, moronic way to highlight his stupidity like the Dale joke did, he instead just changes the subject as a lead-in to the next scene, which is one of many missed opportunities for jokes with setups that go nowhere. Another example is when some Girl Scouts tell Hank that the name of Samoan cookies was changed for cultural sensitivity reasons, and Hank loves the idea. Now, I get that characters can and should evolve, but in comedy, that kind of change can often alter the tone of a scene, which it definitely does here. This was a missed opportunity to highlight Hank's well-established resistance to change and tradition, and without leaning into that, the moment has no comedic payoff. Unlike the Dale beer scene, it doesn't reflect what we've come to know, expect, or love about Hank, and as a result, is a pointless feel-good moment rather than a funny one. And that's how a lot of this season plays out. Setups with no punchlines, random and unfunny one-liners, then, to compensate for the lack of clever, grounded humor, they throw in goofy or nonsensical gags and unbelievable coincidences to push the story forward in ways that feel inorganic and generally not funny. On a positive note, aging the characters by 10 years and introducing modern elements was a smart move. It opened the door to fresh, interesting storylines, something that was much needed as the original show had started to feel a bit stale towards the end. But it also undermined the core dynamic between certain characters, most notably Hank and Bobby. In this new season, we learn that Hank has spent much of the past decade working a propane job in Saudi Arabia to fund his retirement. And now that he's back and ready to relax, things have changed, with his absence conveniently explaining why he and Peggy are so out of touch with the modern-day version of Arlen. So we get to see them navigate a society that's vastly different than the one they left behind. Bobby's now 21 and a chef who co-owns a hibachi restaurant with Chain and Ted Wasanasong in Dallas. And Connie Jr. also goes to college nearby, while Joseph is Bobby's construction working roommate. Meanwhile, a new neighbor named Brian, who was renting Hank's house while they were gone, has conveniently moved into another house on the block because apparently he liked the neighborhood. The idea of framing this season as a fish out of water story where Hank is bewildered by how much American culture has changed was a solid one in theory, especially since that dynamic was at the heart of the original show. Hank being introduced to things he doesn't understand and reacting in his typical no-nonsense, stubborn or bewildered way. However, much of that humor gets crammed into the first episode, along with a lot of exposition dumps to explain the backstory and changes between seasons, or to fit in some quick gags, and a lot of it feels completely unnecessary. For example, when we first see Bill, he's an extremely overweight recluse, but then immediately returns to his normal self without any explanation or gradual shift. This could have been an interesting storyline for an entire episode or season, but instead, it's just treated like a quick throwaway gag. And the idea of an America-obsessed Hank leaving Texas to work in the Middle East for years doesn't quite align with his character. They could have easily removed the Saudi Arabia backstory and still incorporated jokes about Hank not understanding modern things like Uber or Ring doorbells just fine, and the backstory really only serves the very first episode anyway. Not to mention, Bobby's only 21, so how long could they possibly have been gone? Ring doorbells, Uber, and these other things he doesn't understand would have been in existence when Bobby was still in high school. And introducing Brian as a new regular character could have been a great opportunity for conflict or humor, much like how Kahn was introduced in season 1, but instead, Brian is just a token character who's randomly mentioned or standing around at times without contributing anything in terms of jokes or depth. Peggy and Dale stand out as characters who are prominently featured in the new season and stay true to what we've come to love about them. The writers also managed to incorporate Boomhauer and Bill in interesting ways, but many of the side characters felt completely dull compared to those of past seasons, and were often just thrown into scenes to deliver generic one-liners, much like how the character Lucky was used for random, dumb, unfunny lines in the previous seasons. Also, some characters like Bobby and Connie Jr. have changed to such a significant degree that they almost don't even resemble their younger selves. The adult version of Connie is now entertaining open relationships with guys who are clearly beneath her and don't respect her, which doesn't quite align with what you'd expect from a grown woman with a genius-level IQ and a strict conservative Asian upbringing. Although her father does want her to marry into the Wasanasong family, but it made sense for a 12-year-old Connie to make poor decisions like this. As an adult, however, it sort of feels out of place. And obviously, a grown Bobby isn't going to be the same goofy kid he was before, but it almost feels like they made him too responsible, stripping away the charm and innocence of his younger self. It would have been nice if they'd kept some of those traits, like his love for comedy and pop culture, which is almost entirely gone. Hank even comments on this in the show. A 21-year-old Bobby could easily have been living at home still, trying his best to start a stand-up career at open mic nights, or been portrayed more as an incompetent letdown. Something that would have been more interesting than the career-focused, refined direction they chose, which feels dull and not what you'd expect from him at that age. And again, him still living at home makes more sense than the Saudi Arabia thing. The more mature Bobby prevents Hank from ever feeling disappointed in him. Instead, Hank is just constantly proud of Bobby, which removes a major comedic element from the original series. It throws off the balance between heartfelt and funny moments, ultimately undermining the original dynamic between the two and removing any chance for natural conflict, the very thing that made their interactions funny and compelling. And even when they set up scenarios which could lead to moments of disappointment or conflict, the writers chose instead to completely avoid it in favor of highlighting Bobby's girlfriend's amazing football skills. And honestly, now that I reflect on everything I'm saying here, I don't know if the writers of this show used ChatGPT or AI to help them write this script, But given how these chatbots tend to push things in a positive direction constantly when you attempt to have them write a story, it wouldn't surprise me to discover the same talentless hacks I mentioned in the intro were using ChatGPT to help them write these stories, and because these bots have no decent ability to write, especially not humor, some of the stories aren't cohesive or compelling and the writers just try to fill the gaps with coincidences and unfunny nonsense. Now that's all speculation on my part, but that's how it feels a lot of the time while watching this show. Like the entire episode 7, Any Given Hill Day for example. It's packed with tons of poor writing and missed opportunities for humor. In the episode, spoiler alert, Bobby, who's now a successful restaurateur, decides to take Hank to the Cowboys Stadium for a football camp. A perfect opportunity to get back to the show's roots where Bobby could flub something and embarrass Hank during his dream vacation. But instead, the writers choose to have Bobby's progressive vegan girlfriend invite herself along. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that doesn't really make sense. Why would this character be interested in a football camp? In fact, considering they're all eating a vegan dinner when she invites herself, you'd think she'd have an issue with the fact that the football is made of leather. But she doesn't. Okay, fine. Let's roll with it anyway. So you expect at least this hippie-type character tagging along will create some sort of conflict. Maybe Bobby will still disappoint Hank in some way, possibly paying more attention to the girlfriend than him, like a cats in the cradle scenario. Nope. They get to the stadium, have a great time, and Bobby is suddenly a superstar athlete. Then, immediately after proving himself to be the next Troy Aikman, Hank's brief disappointment over the girlfriend joining them vanishes when it turns out she's an even better athlete than Bobby. Surprise, surprise. So does this disappoint Hank? No. And how exactly did this crystal-loving, vegan, hippie-type chick learn to be so good at football? Well, she just happens to have grown up spending all her time in that very stadium where her dad worked and taught her how to play better than Emmitt Smith as a kid. What are the odds? So does Hank's newfound admiration for Bobby's girlfriend cause tension between Bobby and Hank? Not really. Bobby's reaction is sort of just whatever. The only thing that does go wrong through this entire act is a nonsensical gag where Bobby's girlfriend, wrapped in a towel and hanging out in the men's shower room for no reason, happens to see Hank in the buff. But that goes nowhere. Then the fallout only happens when they catch the girlfriend dropping a deuce on a desk for a ridiculous reason, and it cuts to Bobby and Hank leaving the stadium, having a heartfelt moment in the car on the way home, talking about the girlfriend who we never see again. There's literally no conflict, no jokes, and no resolution to anything. Things just happen, followed by other things happening with no stakes, no consequences, and none of it connects in any funny, compelling, or meaningful way. But moving on to an actual positive aspect of the show, at least the animation quality was good, which was a relief because it's always disappointing when you see a new version of an old series and things look noticeably different, so anyone binge watching the older seasons like I've been lately can flow from the older ones right into the new much more smoothly than urine through Hank's narrow urethra. Another major element of this revival that felt hit or miss was the voice acting, the changing of certain characters' voices, as well as the decision to leave some out entirely. While part of this was due to the passing of certain voice actors, some omissions were clearly deliberate creative choices, or I guess you could say political ones. For the most part, the original voice cast is back, and many of them slip right back into their roles without missing a beat. A few voices, like Dale and Peggy's, sound slightly different or a bit more strained, but that's understandable given that time has passed and the characters have aged. When it comes to the dialogue itself, though, it's often clunky. While some voice actors do an excellent job of delivering their lines in a natural and believable way, particularly Kathy Najimy as Peggy or Pamela Adlon as Bobby, others aren't quite as consistent. Hank, Dale, and less prominent characters like Chain Wasanasong and Joseph often sound less convincing than they did in earlier seasons. But to be fair, that was already becoming an issue toward the end of the show's original run. And combined with some of the stilted writing, these uneven performances can be a bit distracting or unconvincing at times. Although maybe I'm just being too critical here, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. Johnny Hardwick, the voice of Dale Gribble, passed away in 2023 at age 64. And Jonathan Joss, who's played John Redcorn since season 2, apparently has been dealing with some mental health struggles and having continuous squabbles with his neighbors, one of which shot him this past June, ending his life tragically at age 59. But both actors were able to record lines for their characters since the show's been in production for a few years now, and John Redcorn is featured in 3 of the new episodes, although even his delivery is a bit stiff despite it naturally sounding that way. Hardwick's voice can be heard as Dale in 6 of the 10 episodes, and perhaps the reason for his strained voice was due to his health issues. I don't know for sure, but it changed after episode 7, then being played by another veteran voice actor from the show, Toby Huss. Fans will remember Huss as the voice of Hank's dad Cotton, who makes a brief appearance in a flashback scene, but I'll always remember him best as The Wiz. And he might not be Johnny Hardwick, but I think he did a decent job of impersonating him, which isn't surprising since
nobody beats me because I'm The Wiz!
To be honest, he actually does a better job of matching the tone of Dale's voice from the old seasons than Hardwick himself. But as far as the delivery, he does it with a constant high energy and upward inflection at the end of every sentence, which doesn't quite match the gravelly, monotone way he would speak with a downward inflection during serious moments of the earlier seasons.
Dear wee wee.
Huss was also the voice of another iconic character on the show, Kahn. But after the Floydification of entertainment in 2020, the producers decided to follow the trends set by shows like The Simpsons, Big Mouth, and Family Guy and recast Kahn with the voice of Ronnie Chang. Because even though Ronnie's Malaysian, which isn't any more Laotian than Toby Huss, Chang's got squinted eyes, and most importantly, not white skin. But don't worry, because if you thought he was going to do his best impression of Huss's version of Kahn and keep the character as close as possible to what the audience has known and loved for 30 years like Huss did with Dale, well, you'd be wrong. But that's a good thing. So this new, completely changed, unrecognizable version of Kahn is much better, and exactly what the audience wants. Anyway, Brittany Murphy, who voiced Luann for the duration of the show, and young Joseph till season 4 when Breckin Meyer took over the role, passed away at age 32 just as the final original season was wrapping up. But although Luann was an integral character in the original series, they completely left her out of this one without so much as even a mention to catch up the audience on what she's been up to. You'd think with all the other stuff they explained away in that first episode, they could have at least mentioned her out of respect for Brittany Murphy, but apparently they didn't feel the need. As for Joseph, rather than bringing Breckin Meyer back, they chose to replace him with Ty LeClaire, a voice actor of native heritage, again to match that of the character. Although it's kind of funny if Meyer was available but they refused to let him play the role because of his ethnicity when Joseph's mom is white. So therefore, he must also be at least half white, which the character himself references in the show in a meta moment that falls flat. Legendary rocker Tom Petty, who played Luann's redneck husband Lucky from season 8 on, also passed away at age 66 in 2017, but again, since Luann's not in the show, Lucky isn't needed either and was sort of a Cousin Oliver character anyway, who was just brought in later in the show to try to breathe in new life after it was clearly past its prime. But the final thing that left me feeling like this season was lacking a bit is something that many shows, especially those lasting longer than 10 seasons, often fall victim to, which is a lack of well-rounded characters. The depth of Arlen's citizens is part of what initially made the show irresistibly entertaining. Take Hank, for example. He's a conservative Christian, but not a caricature of one like Ned Flanders, who's evolved into a one-note stereotype. Hank believes in God, but he can't stand the more extreme Christians who try to convince Bobby or the neighborhood that Halloween is a demonic holiday or that he and Peggy are lacking in faith themselves for embracing it. In this new season, there's no mention of God or Christianity at all, which was pretty common in the old show. And I'm not saying there necessarily needs to be, but the absence of these nuanced traits is pretty obvious. In the past, the writers would craft dialogue and incorporate elements into characters' personalities that made them complex. For example, Hank enjoys a good nagging wife joke, but also respects Peggy and values her role as an intelligent, hardworking contributor to the family. He's morally principled, yet enjoys a good prank or is willing to break or bend certain rules, especially if those rules or the people enforcing them conflict with his values, which at their core are traditional American ones. He's a Republican who despises communism, but is frustrated by how capitalism allows big chain stores to push out small-town business owners. And this season barely showed any of these types of contradictory traits within a single character to make them more engaging. Another thing that made the show great was how the writers poked fun at different types of people, sometimes more progressive ones and mostly conservatives, but always in a way that didn't feel like the creators were trying to shove a specific worldview down your throat. But in this season, they kind of shied away from both sides. they didn't really go deep into mocking either progressive or conservative types, likely in an attempt to avoid alienating some portion of their audience by seeming political, which is good, but if they were able to do it years ago without seeming that way, they could have done it again. And ultimately, in my opinion, their choice to sort of coast on the surface regarding these things rather than diving deep caused this new season to feel like it had less impact in many ways than older ones. That being said, there were moments where the show got a bit preachy just for the sake of it, like when Bobby claims Looney Tunes is racist, trying and failing to make a meta joke about the changing of voice actors, as well as parts of episode 9 when Good Hank becomes a toxic misogynist. Still though, given how few of these moments were scattered throughout the show, I was just happy to see these characters, a type which isn't featured much in modern media, make a comeback. While other shows try to one-up each other in crudeness, constantly stooping lower and lower to shock or provoke some portion of their audience, King of the Hill never relied on pushing boundaries to be entertaining, and for the most part, still doesn't. This new version isn't side-splittingly hilarious, but it is wholesome, enjoyable family entertainment. And while I do miss the old-fashioned, clever, character-driven humor of the show, I did enjoy the dynamic between Connie and Bobby, as well as Hank and Peggy as always, so I'm still looking forward to seeing where it goes in the next season. And overall, mostly due to the lack of laugh-out-loud moments, I give it a 6.8 out of 10. But what do you think? Have you seen the new show? Are you planning to see it? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said here? Comment your thoughts below and let us know where you stand as a King of the Hill fan. It's good to be back. Thanks for watching. Until next time, live well and take it easy. Later.